Buckle up, with Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan. Let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold, with heroes and villains, new and old. Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan guide the way in the world of EDH we play.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Commander's Pod. Thank you for joining us again today. My name's Duncan. I'm joined by Sloan.
Hello.
And Jeff.
What's up?
We got Jeff back after a 2-week hiatus. He was doing the Disney thing, spending
nice
lots
trip.
of money. And now we got him back. Thanks again to Andrew for filling in while he was gone. That was fun. We got some stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about building synergy. It's like when you build your deck, how do you find those cards that really fit into the theme, what the commander does or what you want the deck to do? How do you find those cards? Sometimes it's easy to find the good stuff, but the synergy is a little harder, especially for some weird stuff that you want to do. We're going to talk about Jeff's triggers. We're going to talk about the turtle deck.
A little bit, yep.
Yeah, the turtle deck made another appearance, and yeah. So the turtle deck, we've heard about it a lot of times. What's his name? Arkelos.
Yeah, so I got to play this recently, Arkelos Lagoon Mystic, with some of my buddies via webcams. And
do you want to read what he does again?
So Turtle Shaman 2/4. As long as Arkelos Lagoon Mystic is tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. As long as Arkelos is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. And he's 1 black, green, blue. So he basically, the whole combo in here, which is what I got to pull off, was essentially with him out and I have him untapped, I put out Retreat of Coral Helm, which is an enchantment, 2 and a blue, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. You may tap or untap target creature, or I can scry one, right? So with that out, and then I had out Scaled Herbalist, which is tap. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, and it's a 1 and a green creature, 1/3. And there's a bunch of creatures like this that I have that do essentially the same effect. So as long as him or one of the other ones are out. And then the last thing that I did was in my hand, I had the land that comes in normally tapped, and you have to return a land to your hand. It was Demir Aqueduct. So usually it comes into play tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land card you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a blue and a black. So essentially, with Arkelos out, it does not come in tapped. And so what it allows me to do is I get to tap it, and then I can bounce it back to my own hand. So I created a blue and a black mana, and I just do that infinitely because there's nothing that's as whenever it enters, the enchantment triggers. So then I get to untap my Sacred Herbalist. So then I can tap it again to put it back into play, then tap it for mana, bounce it back to my hand, untap, and I just do that infinitely. And so essentially I just created enough mana to put out Retreat to Hagra, which says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And that's 2 and a black enchantment. And so I got to do that combo on my buddies, which is super fun. But again, it's funny because it's very slow building. It's a slow churning deck.
Right.
But once it gets to that point and I get to do it, I told them, I said, so I'm going to demonstrate the loop. If you guys can stop it, you need to now. If you can't, I will win the game. And so I demonstrated the loop for them. And they were just like, that's very silly. I mean, we can't do anything. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And
so,
it is a slow deck, but it fits with the turtle theme.
Right, exactly. You know, life is not a race, as the special text says.
With the pauses.
With the pauses. It does have the pauses. So, but I got to do that, I think it was this week or the week before, which is, I always enjoy being able to do these fun combos with my lower powered decks, because that's kind of why I built them, is they're supposed to be a little bit more fair for the table, as well as it's kind of straightforward. And then I did, just so you're aware, even though they were playing online, I did make them tap everything that came into play, including their planeswalkers.
So you just said, whoa, hold on, you cannot just play that planeswalker.
Yeah, it must be tapped.
It must be tapped.
I did it to them, and they also sighed great sighs of sighness when I did it. But sorry, man, it's the rules.
just following the rules.
Ridiculous.
So, but it was fun. It was a good time, and I enjoyed being able to bust them out again. I haven't played them in a while, so
Yeah,
had a good
I haven't
time.
seen them in a while, but that's cool. let's talk about how long should a turn be? How much time is the point at which a player has just taken too much time? Or is there a time? Should they be allowed to just keep going an hour turn, you know?
Well, I feel like with this being our counterspell subject, the person who's clearly going to be at the opposite side of us should probably go first.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Jeff?
Jeff.
Well, I don't know. It depends on what's going on. You're gonna play your deck, and we've had times where some of the interactions gets pretty weird because when you're playing at high powered tables, turns are not necessarily going to take that long because you're going to combo out, right? It's less synergy. It's more just win now. When you build lower powered decks, sort of like the one you're doing, there might be more synergy. Now that's still a combo the way you won.
Right.
But if you're, building some sort of tribal deck or enchantments or something like that, where it's not a combo win, you've taken the combos out, right? Because a lot of times people will be like, oh, you win, and you're like, nah, I don't have that combo in there. So that's not what's going to happen. The turn will take longer, but the deck's more fair. So it's just a challenge sometimes. And then I think one time, Duncan, you played a card for my enchantment deck that when we've talked about it before, and it basically caused 3 extra triggers for every enchantment I played, essentially. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? I mean, do you just give up the turn? If you guys are talking about how long it takes to make decisions on someone's turn, meaning you're not playing extra turns, someone's just thinking through all their decisions. When you have decks that are aggro, you don't have to think that much, right? Attack, turn them sideways, attack, math is for blockers. Very easy, right? But when you have a deck with a ton of synergies and it's not going for the combo win, that could take a long time to understand in what order you have to play the cards. Because as much as someone might say, hey, you're taking too long, then when you go fast and you trigger it incorrectly because you're trying to go fast, then they're mad because you triggered it incorrectly. So it's like, if you're going to push people to be fast, then you have to back off of your desire for everything to be perfect. And if you're going to, not do that, then allow them to have the time to play through their turn.
So my argument would be yes. If they are reacting to something that happened or dealing with triggers or there's a lot of stuff going on, then sure, it's going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
The issue I have, and this is not about you.
Right, but
it sometimes it does apply to you.
Yeah, it does apply to me because I played decks with lots of synergy.
But when somebody spends 10 minutes just 10 minutes on their turn and essentially plays a land and passes at the end of that turn, that can get frustrating.
Yeah, that seems a little ridiculous.
That happens a lot in games, though, I think.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Are you sure you're not being hyperbolic?
Maybe I am, but at that point, even 5 minutes seems like an eternity when nobody's doing it.
I would be hard-pressed to think they're even spending 5 minutes and just playing a land.
Oh, no, it happens. And the other thing is
wild.
The times when long moments are spent, and you've been the fender on this one for sure. Mm-hmm. Long moments are spent deciding which land to play. That's the big decision.
Yeah. Well, we also have to ask a question: what is a long moment?
Well, I mean,
you presented a long moment as 10 minutes. A long moment, 30 seconds.
I'm saying even for that type of a decision, even 5 minutes is too long.
5 minutes is too long. I don't think anyone's spending 5 minutes deciding what land. It might feel. Here's the other part of it. When you're playing this game, a minute can feel like 5 minutes. It really can, because you want them to go quicker, and you would have made the decision quicker. And Duncan, for you play a lot of basic lands. So for you, it's not a problem, and you also tend to play 1 to 2 colors. Right. So if you're playing 5 colors, though, you do have to think about what land you're going to play, because you're looking at all the pips in your hand, and you're going, this land's coming in tapped. Do I play it now and not be able to play other stuff?
Well, see, the fix there is you don't play tapped lands.
Well, but in a 5-color deck, sometimes you have to play those triomes, and they're tapped lands.
No, I know. I'm saying that.
Or surveil lands are really powerful now too. So it is deck building, and it is it's very easy to feel like someone's taking a lot longer than they maybe are because you don't take 30 seconds to make that decision, whereas they are.
I am quite certain I can say with absolute certainty that it's more than 30 seconds. It's more than a minute. It's more than 2 minutes at
To
times.
make a decision on a land?
Yes. Would you agree, Sloan?
So here are my thoughts on it. So I'll address that first. There have been times where on turn 1, someone is taking 2 minutes to figure out what land they're putting down. Listen, I don't care if Magic suddenly made 100 different colors and you had a 100-color deck. It should not take you 2 minutes to figure out on turn 1 which land you're putting down.
I don't think it takes 2 minutes. I think
There
you guys are
have
being
been times
hyperbolic.
where people have taken 2 minutes to figure out what land they're putting down because they're looking at their hand and they're trying to do the math of, if I put this one in tap now, and then I have to put this one in tap now, then I have to do this spell on a turn later than I want to, unless I draw. And I've seen it. I've been a part of it where there are games where people are taking 2 minutes on turn 1.
We're not saying every time.
We're not saying, I'm
And
not
we're not
saying it happens
talking
every
just
game.
about you.
I'm not saying you.
I
I'm not
could see in a
saying-
world where maybe 2 minutes, if you're the first player or everybody else just played basic lands real quick, you get to your turn and you are trying to figure out how to play everything. I can understand that.
Right. And again,
In rare
regards
occasions.
in regards to my thoughts on turns, it's very simple. Towards the beginning of the game, your turn should not be exceeding 5 minutes. Towards the beginning of the game, there's not enough happening to where it warrants a turn taking more than 5 minutes at the beginning. As the game progresses, I am okay with turns taking slightly longer because there's more pieces on the board. There's more things you have to calculate. There's more things you have to take into account. I'm 100% okay with if we're on turn 15 and someone is taking a 10-minute turn, as long as what they're about to do either ends the game or drastically changes the game in a certain way. I understand it. Like I get it. I'm fine with it. However, I do have a stipulation. If you are going to take 10 minutes to calculate what you're going to do, and then you start doing it and you mess up, no, sorry. We gave you 10 minutes to calculate this out. We let you think about it. We let you go through the motions in your head. We let you sit there and count your mana 15 times. We let you do all that. And then you start doing it and then you mess up. Listen, sorry.
I mean, within reason.
Yeah,
Sometimes it is a multi-card, multi-thing interaction,
Right.
and it's
And everything-
you can't figure it out all on your
right, and everything's within reason, of course. But at the end of the day, the longer the game is going, I understand turns are going to take longer. At the beginning of the game, though, you should not be taking crazy long turns unless you're about to literally just tee off and win. And I'm only going to throw this out there because it's so prevalent. Nadu, on turn 3, can have a 45-minute turn.
On turn 2.
On turn 2, he could have a 45-minute turn. And it's because that's the way that card plays. That has nothing to do with that player playing slow. It's just that stupid card. That's how it works,
Well-
right? So there is a difference between cards causing the game to go longer because of how they interact, like the interaction you had with Duncan's deck, and a player taking a long time to do something that's insignificant and has no effect on the game and was very minimal.
So the challenge here is, I think, that you have Magic players and you have chess players. And if a lot of people came from more strategy backgrounds, like when you play chess, there are two different types of play. There's a type of chess you play where you make a move and you have a chessboard going. You might spend a week and a half playing that chess game. And then there are chess games where you have a clock and you're trying to go quick.
Yeah, blitz.
And so you have different ways of playing. And if you have a conversation sort of like that Rule Zero conversation up front, you can decide what type of deck you want to play. Like if people want to go really fast, play more high-powered decks. Then there's not as much decisions to make. You know what you're doing. You're going for your combo. It's very simple. When you're playing a deck that doesn't have tutors, that is random every time, that doesn't have all that built-in stuff, you don't know what you're doing next turn because you're not doing the same thing. Based on the card you draw, your entire plan might change.
Right.
Because you're not going for, I'm going to attack and kill, I'm going to combo and kill. So it changes.
But what
and the
I'm-
reality is those decks do take a little longer to play and think through.
But what I'm saying is that shouldn't be happening on turn 2.
I know
That is
was not
something
the
that
original question, though. should turns take a long time on turn 1 and
No,
turn
but
2?
No,
he's saying
I'm
it's
saying
saying
over
it's-
the course of the game, the length of a turn does change. I'm not saying
I
on
don't
turn the
disagree
turn
with that.
one, your turn one, which should take you probably a minute, maybe tops. I'm not expecting someone to also take a minute on turn 15 because that's ridiculous. There's way too many factors that change.
Right.
My point is that the length of a turn is dictated by the length of a game, and then the other factor that goes into it is the complexity of the turn that you're about to have.
And I
And
also
in my opinion, if you're going to take 10 minutes to calculate out what you're going to do, and you go and then at the end of it, you're like, oh, you know what? I miscalculated. I can't do this. I'm just gonna lay down and pass. It's like, come on, man. Like, you're killing me.
so there's
You know, that's
there's-
my point.
There's two parts to it, I think. One part is how you build your deck. That will affect the speed at which you go. And there's also different types of people. People think differently.
Sure.
So if you're going to be the type of person who says, I want games to go fast, which I've been to the shop, I know there's a lot of pressure from certain people to go fast. What you're essentially saying is if someone thinks differently, right, then they have to change who they are, how they function. Some people just move slower. And like my son Jaden's very analytical. Like if you think I take a slow turn, good grief. He takes a really slow turn. But he's going to analyze everything. He's going to think it through. And if you speed him up, if you make him go faster, he's not going to have fun. So like if you're at a shop and you're going, oh, this guy always thinks through his decisions too much. He takes too long. That's how his brain processes things. And if you're going to, this is a game of fun. If someone has a 10-minute turn, have a conversation. Talk about what's on TV. Talk about your D&D game. Talk about what's going on in life, but just be careful how much you're slow, because that's rude.
Well,
It's
first,
rude.
hold on. There's two sides to this, though.
Yeah.
Number one, if somebody's turn, they are doing something.
Yeah.
That's okay. If your deck is built around, and I have seen decks that do this, I'm going to take a 20-minute turn. I'm going to be doing stuff the entire time. And when my turn's done, I'm not any closer to winning than I was at the beginning of my turn.
Right.
Dirtling. What we're
It's
talking
a
about is
dirtle
dirtling.
deck that
Yeah.
does absolutely nothing. And people build these decks, and some people love these decks.
Or a solitaire deck, which is
You
Nadu.
need to be up front if you're going to play that deck, because to me, it's rude.
Agreed.
That is, you want to do stuff, you want to play solitaire, and you're just looking for witnesses to watch you.
Agreed. And that's a rule zero conversation. I 100% agree with that. And there's different levels of dirtling, right?
Right.
Because you could have a dirtle deck that's an enchantment deck, and it's just an enchantment deck, and it's fine. You can have an enchantment deck that's massive dirtle, right? There's sort of a spectrum. I think that's a rule zero conversation. And if you're someone who's in normally plays high powered and wants to go fast, just let them know they might have a deck that can do
Well,
that.
and
But they might not know that when they pick their deck.
The ultimate offense to me is when that deck then also has multiple extra turn spells, and I've seen that.
Sure.
I mean, that is just the height. To me, that's just as bad as a pub stomper coming in with a CEDH deck to beat on the guys that have the low power deck.
100%.
pre-cons.
And that's a conversation people should have.
Right. But also, I think as a player, you do have it's part of the social contract that you should realize that, yes, some people think different. You may be the type that it takes longer to make your decisions. You're analyzing everything. And I think there's two levels of that. There's a guy I play with quite regularly, and he has great decks because he's had his collection since like revised.
Yeah.
But he says all the time, I'm not a good Magic player. And he's not. He needs to really think hard to be able to make the decisions. And we all get it. However, when he's tutoring for a land and that's taking 10 minutes or even 5 minutes to tutor for a land, and he waits till his turn to do it every time, that's the part that gets people. And I've tried telling him, like, look, we get that you need to analyze and you say you're not a great player.
Yeah.
But the tutoring for lands, then don't wait, because you can't use that land.
Yeah, there's some.
You can use it as soon as you pass turn. You could be doing that the whole time everybody else's turn is doing.
Right.
He's like, but I need to watch to be able to see what's going on because it takes me a while to catch up.
There are some shortcuts you can take, is what you're saying. Take some shortcuts, like
Right.
just do it on someone else's turn while other people are doing things. And I think that's smart. And then that's the other point that you hit on too, is you have different levels of player and different experience. Like some people have, like you guys talk about, Johnny will say all the time, reading the card is OP.
Yeah, reading's
Okay,
OP,
and
yeah.
then I think the professor says something like reading will tell you what the card is, or
Reading
something,
a card explains the card,
which it doesn't always nowadays.
unfortunately.
But you may find that you guys, someone plays Dockside Extortionist, we all know what that is. Other people don't know what that is. They have to take a second to process. For us, it's really quick. I know exactly what to do when Dockside comes out because I've seen it so many times. So I know I need to sack whatever I can sack that's an artifact. I need to make these quick decisions. Someone who doesn't have experience like us, they might have to think through, well, what does that mean? Because they've never seen it before. And so there is different levels of play. And when you guys play with people who have been playing every single week, multiple times a week, yeah, 100% they're going to be faster than people that get to play once every 2 months.
Right, but again, at the end of the day, you're nitpicking, I think, what Duncan is trying to ask. On average, when we sit down to play, I think he's asking, what should a turn look like? If obviously, there's a million different factors you can put into that question. There's a million different things that can change that answer, from experience to the player, to even age of the player, to knowledge of cards, to knowledge of rules, to just, there's a million different things. Attention span. But on average, what should a turn look like? I
guess more to the point, at what point should you or ever should you rush the player?
I mean, I think they're again, not trying to push the player to make mistakes or be mean about it or anything. But like, if you're sitting there and you've been waiting and you're waiting and the person just keeps tapping mana and counting it and looking at their hand, they put it back down and they count again. And they, after a certain point, you got to make a decision. Like, we have to move forward. And I know some people are analytical. Some people need to sit and read every single card. But at the same time, there is also a point of where it just seems like that person is trying to delay the inevitable, or they actually don't have a play. They're just trying to make something up out of nothing. And there is a certain point where you need to say, hey, listen, it's been X amount of time. We're still sitting here waiting for you to make your first play on your turn. Like,
sometimes that's just as a reaction.
Yeah, like where are we going? Like
in response, and they're like,
right. So there is a point in time where you have to, if it's the player, it's not the card interactions. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the player itself. That person just taking a long time to do nothing. Eventually, you need to get them to step on the gas pedal so we can get the game moving forward. I'm not saying you need to be mean about it. I'm not saying you need to rush them. I'm not saying you need to tell them that they're a slow player and they're bad at math. I didn't say any of those words.
But people do that. If
Sure.
people do rush them.
I can't control
rude.
those people. I can't control anything they're doing. All I can
Sometimes
do
it's
is be
been
nice.
us.
right.
Like, hey, let's not act like we don't do that we don't sometimes rush people. The challenge is that, like, in business, we always talk about you correct in private, you praise in public. And it's not a bad rule for life either. If you have a friend who tends to be taking longer, there are like coming alongside them and going, hey, can I help you? Because your turns are taking too long. And it's a problem for the group, right? Because we play a lot. If there's someone who's doing that, you can go to them and say, may I suggest you just pick 4 decks, just play those for a while till you get really good at them, okay? Or practice your deck when we're not playing. Goldfish it. Really get used to what all your cards do and how the triggers work and what everything happens. Get really used to it so you go a little bit quicker. But I would say in the game, it's really, I don't know what the benefit of like pushing someone or having that conversation is, because it's not a teachable moment.
But
It's
you're
not a moment
acting,
where they're going to be open for that. They're going to feel attacked.
but you're acting like I'm saying, like I'm flipping the table over and punching them in the face and saying, hey, you need to take your turn. This is
I mean,
ridiculous.
I pay to watch that.
They
That'd
may,
be hysterical,
They may
but no.
feel like that though, Johnny.
Again, I can't control their feelings. If I'm being nice about it, and I say, if we're sitting down at a table and I'm playing a game, and the guy across from me, his turn starts, and it's been 5 minutes, it's been 10 minutes, it's been 13 minutes, and I'm sitting there, he still hasn't done anything, and I say, hey, real quick, we kind of need to keep playing. Are you planning on doing something so we can move forward with the game, or do you need help with something? Like, what's going on? if they feel attacked because I'm that nice and kind, that's on them. I can't do anything
If you're
about
doing that, if you're saying, how can I help you? That's great. It has been my experience. And this, some of the times it didn't even have anything to do with me. Matter of fact, the last time we were at the card shop, I think there was a big discussion about how long the game was taking in general, if you remember, Duncan.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with me, actually. I was playing decks that were quick on purpose,
Right.
like dragons and stuff that I know very well. It was not a nice conversation. It was not, like, the amount of times I've seen someone go, hey, are you struggling to count this? Can I help you? Can I help you search your deck? Can I help you give an ideas? Which I do with my kids all the time, because you have to do that because they don't know what's in the decks, right?
right.
I mean, I can maybe count it on one hand.
Well,
the vast majority
and
of the
here's
time,
the
it's
pro-
angry and rude.
The reason I wanted to address this is because the problem is when the attitude is everybody just needs to sit there and wait. What ends up happening is the passive aggressive stuff.
Yeah.
So let's say it's not the aggressive, it's not the super kind, it's the whose turn is it? And then 5 minutes, whose turn is? Oh, it's still okay. It's still your turn.
Yeah,
Is it still your turn now? Oh, okay.
right.
You know.
Because that's rude. That's unkind too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the passive aggressive stuff isn't good either. That's going to make them feel bad. So, my point on bringing this up is number one, yeah, we all do need to take a breath and realize that we don't all play the same. There are times you're going to have to wait. And if there is a player that continually every game is slowing things down, then like Jeff said, maybe you pull them aside and say, hey, you know, just so you know, I'm feeling a lot of frustration from the table because your turns are taking long. I'm willing to help you if I can help you figure out what's going on that's making it take long, that maybe I can help you because I'm a little more experienced or whatever. You know, there is maybe some of that. Like Sloan said, there are nice ways to address it in game.
Sure.
And sometimes if you know that the table is going to be that type of table that's going to be like, come on, hurry up. Maybe sooner than later, you might want to be the nice guy and say, hey, do you need any help figuring out what's going on? Do you know the interactions? Do you need any help?
Right. Because from at least the personal experience I have with people rushing other people, I myself feel like I've never been the bully of the table, making people feel bad when they're taking a long turn in regards to just pushing them to the point of basically wanting, like,
Well, I mean, except
it's
for the
unnecessary.
time you flipped the table and punched him in the face.
that was a different me. No, but I mean, it's yes, there's other people out there that do that.
It didn't really happen. I'm joking.
Yeah, please don't put that out there. I mean, I got a popped blood vessel, so it looks like that might have happened recently in my eye, but I didn't, I promise. But the point is other people, how they're going to interact or react with slower players, I can't control that. All I can talk about is what I see and what I have tried to do and how I try to approach those situations. And we always pick on Jeff for this because he is the player that, generally speaking, between me, Duncan, and himself, takes the longest. But
I agree. I do. Yeah.
he also does have more complex decks on top of the fact that he doesn't get to play as often. And so there is a level of me and Duncan jesting him because sometimes on turn one, he will take 30 seconds to put down a land, which we joke about. But we also know that...
Guilty.
Yeah, he also has 4-color decks, 5-color decks. I have one 5-color deck.
And here's the other thing I'd
And
say.
one 4-color deck.
Jeff, like the chess is a good analogy because Jeff, I think, is playing chess when he's playing. He's thinking ahead. And I'm not quite sure how this is going to come out because I can see how this could come out. And it might sound
sound bad.
But I feel like you and I don't need to play chess to play at the same level as him.
And I think part of the reason why is
our decks are more powerful as far as...
I don't even think it's that. I think Jeff has powerful deck. It's just that we get to play so often with our decks that we almost intuitively know this is what we're doing. Because there have been games where Jeff is like, he goes to tutor and he's like, oh, that land's not in this deck. Well, I need to get a different land.
Right.
Because he just...
100%. Yeah. Because I have 15 decks.
Right. And the difference between myself and Duncan and Jeff is we do get to play more often, and we do have a couple of decks that are very quick and they're very straight to the point. But on top of that is we don't have as many decks that need to synergize in a certain order in order to make them work the way they're supposed to in order to win, like Jeff does. But that's because Jeff likes those decks. And we know Jeff likes building those decks. So yes, we'll jest with him and we'll poke and jab at him for being the slow player. But honestly, it's just because there's other factors that go into it. At the end of the day, I think that looking at the scale of the game is the best way I think you can determine basically gameplay. If someone is taking extremely long turns at the beginning of the game, they're taking extremely long turns in the middle of the game, extremely long turns at the end of the game, and their deck and what they're doing doesn't constitute that, that's a conversation you need to have with that person. If it does, and it's not the player is taking long turns and not doing anything, but they're actually doing stuff to move forward, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Like,
Well,
you're doing things.
with
Like,
the exception of
you know?
the people that play the dirtily decks on purpose and
Yes.
and that type of that don't go anywhere.
Yep.
But I also would say that there needs to be a flip side. If we're going to be polite and wait our turn,
Right.
then you as the slow player need to cut corners where you can, where it's not going to affect your gameplay. Start your tutor for your land as soon as your turn ends.
And
Right.
that's the biggest thing that I've tried to practice, and that would be the encouragement I'd give to others. If you're going to take that's the other thing too, is look at that. You guys might say to someone when they sit down, if they're pulling out an enchantment deck and you know they tend to be a slower player, you might say to them, hey, hold on, actually, I was looking for a faster game, right? Because you're smart enough to know. If
Right.
you're a slow player and playing enchantments, good Lord. Or if you're playing artifacts, that can be just as bad.
Yeah.
At the same time, what he said about the learning how to take shortcuts, that's huge. Just understand that when you guys play those shortcut games, there are times where it's not optimal. For instance, I'm doing a tutor and I go, hey, just take your turn. I'm going to tutor, right? You might not want to take your turn.
Right.
Because you take your turn, you play a card, and I was going to get something to help my game plan, but you played something really scary, so now I'm getting an answer.
Right.
So that's where you have to be careful on that. But I think there is, responsibility for the slow player. Go practice your decks, go goldfish them, understand what's in them, learn how to take shortcuts. That's your responsibility.
Yeah.
If you are a person who thinks through everything. And hey, you might be very successful in life because you think through everything.
Right.
That might help you in life. It might not help you at the magic table, so try to be quicker. For the people that want to go quick, just have a little grace. Have the conversations with them outside of the game, and understand that you may think you're not being a bully, but
the
you might
snide
be.
comments about whose turn is
Yeah.
it every minute on the minute
Yes.
or every 2 minutes even, that's still being a bully.
Yeah, speaking as a slow player, I can tell you the internal conflict I have of wanting to make the experience good for you guys, but also having a strong desire to win. It is hard. It's not easy. So just so you know, I don't think most people are sitting there going, I don't care about the other person. I'm just going to take as long as I want. Their goal is to go fast. They just don't have that button. they don't have the go fast button.
I think some people also just don't care. They're like, I'm just gonna play my game.
It's hard to think that about other people. I think,
mean, you can't say everybody's innocent at the same time. You can't say
Well,
everybody's guilty.
we-
Everyone, there's people of every, as someone once said, there's a butt for every seat, right?
Yeah.
So
But what side of that line do you want to live on? And I'd rather live on the side of the line that just goes, I'm going to consider others as more significant than myself. I'm going to assume they have the right attitude. And I don't always do that. But if we try to do that more, that's probably better.
yeah, I mean, despite what we say about Jeff, he is a good person. Despite what we kind of say about each
Got
other,
him fooled.
yeah. We are good people at the end of the day, and that's why this conversation is slightly weird, because I do think, like Jeff said, internally we do care about the other people at the table and making sure that we're not wasting their time. Because, for example, someone like Jeff, he may not be able to go to the card shop every single week like Duncan does and get to play. So, playing these super long games and taking 40-minute turns where nothing happens could be considered rude to Jeff, who doesn't get to play as much at card shops, So
Sure.
that idea of, like, yes, we do genuinely care about making sure that the turns that we're taking and how we're playing, we're doing it in a way that is respectful to other players. I think we here on the show have that mentality. I don't think any of us are malicious people and intentionally
Just
are
me.
trying to. Well, he is the blue player, so everything he does is malicious.
Well, and this Duncan, is this
But-
a pretty good transition into triggers here?
Yeah. So, this all can be triggers, right? The person who's taking too long when I've seen people when the comments start coming out.
Yeah.
You can see them go, okay, I'm going to show you a long turn. All right. You know, it
Good
triggers
grief.
them a little bit.
Yeah.
At least I
You know,
know I've
and
never
vice
done that.
versa.
Yeah.
You know, we get triggered when they're taking their turn forever.
Yeah.
Jeff, what's triggering you today?
Well, this is a good example because we've talked a couple times now, and in many episodes about the fact that I don't get to play as much as others, at least in this room right now. I would say there's probably a lot of people just like me who get to play less frequently. And then what's kind of difficult for me is not only that, but my cards get used a ton, and they're not used by me. So I have whatever amount of dollars that collection is, which is vast. It's about the price of a car, and I see other people play them, and I watch you guys play them, and I don't get to go play.
Right.
And so, man, being an adult is frustrating and it's
Yeah.
triggering, and we all run into that. Duncan, there's times you want to play where you don't get to, and Johnny, where you want to play and you don't get to.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, but I would say that's what's aggravating me right now. It's like, I
definitely
really want to
when-
go.
When you get to be an adult
Yeah.
and you're like, wait, you mean my time isn't all my own?
Yeah.
What just happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Running a business, having a family, having kids, having a wife, having your mom or dad around, and your aunts, uncles, cousins. It's time consuming. In-laws. And when you add it all up, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just always doing something.
Yeah.
And so it is challenging to get out there and play. I did get to get out there and play some in Orlando with my kids. That was a lot of fun. And I'll talk about a different thing that was aggravating me about that on the next episode. But in this one, it's really hard. I'm sure a lot of people understand that. It's very frustrating to not get out there to play much. I mean, because when was the last time I made it to the shop? It had to have been like 2 months ago.
Yeah. It had to be at least a couple of months.
Yeah, it was. It was when we went to Dark Side.
Dark Side. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
and
yeah.
then-
That was a while ago.
So, but we were going to try to play Monday, right? I think.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, because we're off from work. We all work at the same place, so we have Monday
so
off.
that, come over to my house. We'll do a cookout. That way, I'm still sort of around the family a little
Right.
bit, and maybe have your family. Maybe we'll have the families come over, do the cookout, spend the family time, and then we'll get to play.
And that's the key, right? That's what you have to do is figure out ways
How
to
can I
work it
weasel
in.
magic into my
No,
life?
ways to bring it in. So I started bringing Connor to the shop with me, my
Yeah.
son, and he collects Pokemon cards. I've taught him how to play. He refuses to play Pokemon, at least the way you're supposed to, but he collects Pokemon cards. Even that's a loose term because he treats them horribly. But regardless, I take him to the shop. He likes going to the shop. They have a Wii there hooked up to the TV. He'll play that. He likes watching us play. He has a good time. So I still get to spend time with my son. I still get to play Magic.
Right.
It's a win-win. My wife gets some time where she can do what she wants to do instead of.
Would they take a TV? Do they have they have a TV there then?
They
several.
have the little ones
So-
at the end of the table that
So
they have hooked up.
if I brought a gaming system, they'd probably let it hook it up, and maybe Connor and my boys could
Oh,
just
yeah,
play
for
video games.
sure.
They would love playing video
for
games
sure. And like I
together.
said, they have a Wii set.
And
up
I'd
already.
Switch.
give
They have Switch.
I'd
Switch
be
right now,
willing to
Switch.
give the shop $20. Like, here's $20 for the use of this TV for the.
They're not going to
5
care
or
about
6
that.
Well,
With-
it might
I
take
mean,
up seats.
Yeah, but like for instance, Connor eats snacks.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yep, snacks and drinks.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
my bill last night, him and his buddy went with him, and it was like $39 because
They just kept going up to the.
yeah, they just kept going up there and
Put it on my dad's tab.
Connor just discovered Doritos because he had previously been allergic to the cornmeal and now he's not, so he just discovered those. and-
Oh, jeez.
yeah,
The Cool Ranch or
no,
not
just
the-
regular. He hasn't even tried Cool Ranch yet. That's gonna blow his mind.
My soon to be 12-year-old is Cool Ranch. We literally just bought that for his little friend party today.
yeah.
Oh, it's so
But anyway,
funny.
my point is, so you find ways like that to kind of incorporate family into playing.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would tell you, Jeff, is something that I discovered is you need to have time for yourself, for your things.
Yeah.
Family's great,
Yeah.
business is great. You got to have things. Even if it's you say, you know what? I mean, even I know Sloan, at least once every couple weeks, he'll say to his wife, I got to get out of the house, whether it's to play disc golf or to play
Yeah.
Magic. He does something. You should say, hey, every second Saturday of the month.
So my wife, by the way, just to be clear,
No,
my
no.
wife is not the one holding me back.
No, it's you not setting the time aside. But I'm saying just
Yeah.
set the expectation with her. That way,
Well, and-
everybody's on the same page.
And I think
Right.
it's important to know that there are times in people's lives, right? Because there was a time I played more,
Yeah.
But what's going on now in business for me, this is not a time for that. This is a time for me to invest in the business, invest in growing the business so that later on I can have more time.
Yeah,
It's
you can
just
be like Coach.
and it's also summer. It's also summer, by the way.
Yeah,
We're in air conditioning. So
in Florida.
in Florida. So in the summer, it's like, you know what? I might not have the patience to go and be the type of person I want to be playing a game with other people after a long week. Frankly, I just need to hang with the family.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
sure.
you
Right.
know,
But
there's some of
I'm
that
saying
too.
you should try having a set, even if it's one day a month.
Yeah, it's wise advice. Yeah.
You know, and if Sloan and I are on the same page, we can set up that same one, make sure we can all meet at one of the shops. But I'm saying I think that's important too. But yeah, you can find ways to do it. You can find ways to combine the family with the playing.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Well,
the
I'm excited
solution
about
to your
Monday.
trigger.
I'm excited about Monday. We're
All
going to
right?
make it
We'll-
happen.
We'll make it happen.
For sure.
And then we'll talk about it on here. I'll tell you guys about
So
it.
hopefully this is not a segue as to what that is, and this doesn't do what you think it does.
Friends getting together to play Magic.
Yeah.
For 200, please.
Yeah, right. No, but so in this segment, we talk about things that maybe you don't quite know how that works, or maybe a lot of people do it wrong. So this one is death triggers. So when a
Right.
creature dies, triggers, and many people don't realize it. But when a creature does not go to a graveyard for reasons like Rest in Peace that says any card that would go to a graveyard goes to exile instead, if they don't go to a graveyard, they do not die. You do not get the death trigger.
And that's because it's a replacement effect.
It's a replacement effect.
Right.
So,
Going to the graveyard is part of the qualification of what die or death is.
and in my head, I can see how in the past or even next week when I forget, you could think, oh, the way that works is it goes to the graveyard and then it goes to exile.
Right.
But that's not what's happening. It's
Right.
never
And-
going to go
well,
to the
Right.
graveyard.
Yeah, right. And there are cards that may say that.
So yeah, there are some cards that say when this goes to the graveyard, you may exile it instead,
or then
or
exile.
then exile this card once it goes. So there are certain cards that do that and that's why it's so confusing because those cards already exist in the game. And then furthermore, back in the day, putting your commander to the command zone was also a replacement effect,
Yes.
which it no longer is.
Correct.
So what happened was a lot of commanders that said, when this creature dies, blah, 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 were not good commanders because they never actually died because you would send them to the command zone. Then they changed that rule. I want to say, geez Louise, what was it? 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, I think, give or
Yeah,
take.
somewhere between 4 years and now.
So now your commanders do actually hit the graveyard.
Right. So
which
they
is a
do
big
get
deal.
the death trigger because the thing is, by the old rules, there were commanders that had cool death triggers and you couldn't get them.
Unless you let them go there. And then it was a lot of those commanders were only played in recursion decks because
One of the
fact
biggest
that
ones
you
was
had to
that
let it go.
vampire. Shoot, what's her name? Because she shot up in price when
Alendra.
they changed that. Alendra. Yeah,
Alendra.
when they changed that rule.
yeah. At one point, I think Alendra was like $100.
Oh yeah,
and
not
then they
that high
reprinted
anymore.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, they reprinted her and she went down. But yeah, I mean that is definitely one that is very particular and it's very close. Like the wording you need to be certain about when you're reading those cards. Because
So some cards, if it says when this goes to the graveyard, exile it, then it is going to a graveyard. If it says if a card would go to the graveyard, exile it instead.
Which let me ask you a question.
It does not.
Let me ask you a question on that. So like if you have one of the Eldrazi, right? Then when it goes to the graveyard, it shuffles itself back into the
So with
library.
with Rest in Peace, you would not get that.
But with the other one that says it goes to the graveyard and then get exiled,
yes,
it would never get exiled,
Well,
right?
no,
Because it
it-
go
you
to the
would-
graveyard.
So it depends.
it depends on who owns the permanent that's causing it. I
And
believe.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. So,
So this is why, folks,
Magic is easy.
Magic is very complicated. So you basically got to look this rule up when it happens,
right.
Right.
If
So we talked about this with Andrew
a little bit,
a
yeah.
little bit. We talked about if it was when we asked him a bunch of questions for the judge.
Yeah,
And it was
listened to-
about
I listened to
if
that.
there were two things that replace effect when a card would go to a graveyard, what do
Yeah.
you do? And it's the person whose permanent is being affected gets to decide which one applies. So in that instance you're talking about, you as the owner of the Eldrazi would get to choose
So
which
it'd go
one.
to the library.
You
I
could
mean,
shuffle it.
yeah, unless you have something. There is one card, maybe a couple more that can pull cards out of exile. There's not very many.
Right.
Yeah, there's a
But
handful.
Pull from Eternity, I think,
Yep.
is a white card. So you may choose for it to go to exile if you got that card in your hand. You know you can get it right back to your hand.
Right. So, but anyway, that's the point is many people don't realize they think they still get the death trigger when those effects are out and you do not.
That's
So,
a very good. This doesn't do what you think it does.
yeah, it's something that a lot of people get wrong.
Yeah.
And like I said, while we did talk about with Andrew, I just wanted to go a little more in depth and just point out that part of it matters, that you don't get any dies triggers when that's the case.
Right.
So, now let's move into our main topic. We're talking about building synergy. So without using EDH Rec,
Right.
because we've told everybody, hey, you can use the EDH Rec. It talks about synergy. How do you figure out synergy in your deck? Because the other reason why you might not want to use EDH Rec, that only tells you what most people use or what people... You can find things, they're like gold, but you can find things that most people don't play
Right.
that have great synergy.
So the Gatherer, I think it's called.
Yep.
That's a good way to do it. You do need to probably watch some videos on how to navigate it because
To some degree, but I can tell you real quick, you don't do the simple search where you just search by name. You do the advanced search. Then you can put in the exact text you're looking for. And if it's a block of text, like when this creature dies, you type that whole thing and you add it.
Yeah,
or you can
keyword
type
searching.
the keywords that matter, like death or die. And then you can go by color. You can tell it
Right.
and these colors or these colors. And that's the one that trips people up is the and or. If you do if you do blue and black, it's only going to look for cards that have both. If you do or, it will look for any card that has either. The other thing to remember is exclusions. You want, if it's not got any white in it, you want to say not white. You have to put that exclusion in. Otherwise, it's going to find you, oh, this card's blue. Yeah, it's blue-white. I don't have white in this deck.
And then I would say sometimes you just got to go look through a whole bunch of decks people have built because Uba Mask is not a card you would find by keyword search when you're trying to do a discard deck for Tiny Bones, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have the text you're looking for, but what it does is it means nobody has cards in their hand anymore, Uba Mask, if you look it up. And it's a very, very cool card. And the only way you find that card is you got to look through some obscure decks because even on Gatherer, you're not going to find it. Now, EDH Rec, maybe it would be in there.
I think that's one that's popular enough.
It is
It's
now,
it's-
but it wasn't when I found it.
Right. Yeah. I
mean-
mean, it's still probably not at the top of the list. It's
Yeah.
still probably towards the bottom. Another one is like that Golem deck you built. Doesn't say mill anywhere on it, so you're not going to find it when you search
Right.
for mill.
Yeah, I mean, so the one of the things that personally I like doing because it's easier for me to consume if I can see is I like to look up like on YouTube if someone's built this deck. So like people will do like deck text on YouTube and they'll kind of go through their reasoning on why they picked these cards. Also gameplay on the deck because that's the other thing too is when I go to build the deck, I want to see how other people are piloting it and what their idea of how the deck should run is and see if, well, I don't like that way it's piloted. I like some of the cards, but I think there's better cards. So I do like to look up YouTube videos on the decks. I'll look it up, see if anyone's made any videos on it. You can almost always find a video on some kind of commander, if someone building a deck around it.
Yeah,
and
because you'll be
going through things.
You'll be surprised at how things trigger.
Right.
Like you go Sylvan Safekeeper, weird ways to use it. What's another one? What's the Deadeye Navigator, right?
Yeah.
Some of the stuff it can do. There are cards out there you're like, I don't understand. And then you see what it does when you put it with the right card. You're like, oh, holy cow. You're not going
Right.
to get that unless it's a deck tech or what do they call it at the bottom when they design the whole deck and then at the bottom there's an explanation of the deck?
Oh, deck primer.
Primer, yeah. So those are really good too for that. But I think what Johnny's saying is sort of what I'm saying, which is you're gonna have to go look at people's decks
Right.
Yeah,
and
and look
sort
up
of get different ideas.
Look up different deck websites too. So I usually look up Moxfield, I look up Goldfish, I look up Tapped. I go to like probably 10 different Magic the Gathering deck building websites. Architect is another one. Like I just go to all of them and I kind of just start clicking random decks that I find. And I'm like, all right, like some of these cards are pretty similar throughout every deck. It's like, so these are probably key cards for this deck.
Right.
But then you'll find other cards that are just kind of random and obscure. And the thing that is sometimes funny is like you're having someone who's never like, they're like, oh, this is my first deck. And you're like, you kind of feel bad because you're just like, that doesn't trigger the way you think it does.
Right.
Like you want to tell them, but at the same time, they might have other things in there that are really obscure that no one else thought of because that's maybe what that person had available to them in real life. And that's how they built the deck. Right. And so like Jeff is saying, finding obscure decks, but yeah, I try to go to every single deck building website I can.
That's a good
Duncan,
one.
how do you do it?
So there's a couple things. So first of all, if I have a particular card I think works well with what I'm doing, I'll type in Google search cards like whatever that card is. You're going to get some, oh, it's blue, so here's some blue cards. You're going to get some of that on some sites. I don't know
Right.
why they even bother. But there are sites that will tell you, hey, if you like this effect, here's some cards that do things like it.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is think tangently. And what I mean by that is think in a way that isn't intuitive necessarily. So like Nekusar,
Like some might say outside the box.
outside the box, sure. Think Nekusar though. Nekusar, everybody thinks of, oh, you wheel. You put out Nekusar, maybe some other things that increase the damage he does, or do other things like him where it adds to the damage when they draw, and then you wheel. That's great, but there aren't a lot of wheels. The wheel isn't important. The draw is important. You know what card is fantastic in that? The card nobody plays, Force Fruition. The one that says when a player casts a spell, they draw 7 cards.
Yeah.
No one plays that in Nekusar? Why?
No, I mean, it's like, I think it said 5% of the decks or something when I actually looked
That's
up.
weird because I play that in my wheel deck. It's great.
Right. It's
Yeah.
fantastic because people get stuck in the thinking about it's a wheel deck. No, it's
Right.
not. It's a draw deck. The wheel doesn't matter. Another one that I really like, and I cannot think of the name of it right now, but the one I really like, and everybody has said, oh, that's so good. There's a card that you play, and it's an enchantment, and target player sets their hand aside, draws 7 cards, and at the end of that turn,
Yeah, it's an artifact.
no, there's an enchantment that does it too.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
if you don't have the artifact,
No,
artifact
I've
does
got
it.
the
Oh,
artifact. It's a
Memory jar.
memory jar, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's an enchantment as well. It's a blue enchantment.
Okay.
And they set their cards aside, draw 7, and then they exile those. So not only are you making them draw and doing the damage, but they now have to exile whatever cards they don't
didn't use. Yeah.
This
Which
is
is
a good
gross.
point. When you're looking at these decks, don't get stuck in the theme of the deck alone. For
Right.
instance, what Duncan just brought up, or what I brought up earlier with Uba Mask, which is Tiny Bones, he gets to do his ability when someone doesn't have. A lot of this stuff triggers when people don't have cards in their hand.
Right.
So you're not actually looking for just a way to discard. You might be looking for a way to avoid them getting cards in hand, which is not technically discard, but maybe it's instead of drawing, they're exiling and then playing that card from exile. Well, that still does the same thing. Essentially, they don't have a card in their hand.
Right.
So be thinking about what your commander needs to do for your deck to accomplish what it wants, not just the theme.
Right.
Because the synergy may be in an area, and that's what you've done. It's in an area where it's not intuitive, it's outside the box thinking, but it's what allows you to win more with that deck.
Right. And I think because of the fact that one of the things is there's a stipulation, like for example, when people hear Tiny Bones, they're like, oh, discard deck. Like because there's already that stipulation of that, that's the first thing that you're going to go to, which isn't right. No, it's a no cards in hand deck, which is kind of why Arkelos, I'll bring up because I talked about him earlier, is kind of funny because a lot of people are like, oh, it's a landfall deck. I'm like, technically, no. Like, I don't care about landfall triggers. I care about repeatedly putting in a land.
It's a lands matters.
Lands matters deck. Exactly. And so that's the thing is sometimes when you hear these commanders, because they're already affiliated with something, like Nekusar, everyone just, oh, he's a wheel deck. Technically, that's part of him, but what he really is people draw cards deck. Like
Well,
that's what you want to do with him.
Here's another,
force the
just
drawing
using
of cards.
Nekusar as an example, because this is one that I really feel like I have a lot of cards people don't play in it. And so it's a lot, I have a lot of this tangent thinking or outside the box. Mine's a glow. A single blue mana. Each player in turn may pay X any amount of mana, and then all players draw as much cards as mana was spent.
That's so gross.
Yeah, and if you're playing with someone like me, this is also knowing your play group or your meta. I'm paying X. Like I'm paying. I'm going to
Maybe.
draw cards.
But I mean, with Nekusar, I'm gonna have 4 damage per card. You might not be.
I'm probably still going to draw some cards. And just knowing that people will do that is great because it's like some people view life very carefully, like they're very careful with their life. Some people are like, I'll go down to 2. I don't care. Let's go.
Highway to hell, baby. Let's go.
So and yeah, Johnny for sure will do that. The other thing is
Life
like
is a resource.
We've talked so much about like the Redeemed or Rise or however you want to say it, and I'll get that deck out and people are like it's an elf deck, and it's like yeah, it's got elves in it, but that's definitely not what it's doing. It's not elf ball at all. What it is it's a token deck, but it's gonna go get lots of tokens and then do things that come in Crater Hoof, things like that. I don't care about the elves.
Right.
So like you can also, when you're building, understand that there are multiple ways to build that deck. And EDH Rec does do that. When you go to it, it has like, you could build it as this type of deck, this type of, like Atraxa will be Infect, Planeswalkers, +1/+1 counters, Sagas.
I would have to look though. I don't think it, because the majority of players play like Nekusar as wheel. I don't think it says, well, you can play it as wheel or you can play it as draw.
Well, it has like
I don't know,
it does have different categories. They do that. Sometimes
I know,
it's
but I'm saying
sometimes it's high price. Like they'll even price it out by budget too. Like you want to build a low budget version of this deck, here you go. So, but yeah, I mean, like I would say, like even for example, you brought up my Golem deck, which is basically I make people mill until they hit a land, and then I get to take that land from them. So a lot of people are like, oh, you're building a mill deck. I'm like, I'm really more building a deck that cares about tempting triggers. The ring tempts you.
It does have card draw.
Yeah.
You have to hit more themes, and it is third from the bottom, right above Infect for Nekusar, which, okay. It's under Chaos and
I would
Mill
love
and
to see an
Discard.
Infect Nekusar
But
deck.
there
you
is
would not.
there is one for card draw. And what would be interesting is to know if the cards you were talking about were in here.
They might be. So, but I mean, I do think one of the things that happens to us is we think about the immediate first thing that pops in your head. And sometimes just sitting down and looking at the card and reading it a couple of times and being like, well, that's part of the theme. The actual theme is
what am I
this.
really getting at here?
What am I
What do I
trying-
really want to happen?
Right.
What things can get me to that
Right.
place? Not just, what does this do? How do I keep doing the same thing?
Right. And so I think that is definitely one way to advance your deck building capabilities is thinking about the overall theme of what your commander or what your deck is trying to do, not just the immediate first thing that happens, because there are lots of ways to do the same thing in this game, which means that you can build a deck, build the same exact commander that someone else builds, and that deck is completely different. But it's just as good, if not better, potentially, than maybe someone else's deck.
Right.
Because you understand how the theme of it works better. And so I definitely think that is something that's important, is when you're looking at these cards to build a deck around your commander, don't try to focus in so hard on just one part of it. Try to look at the overall thing. Because again, Nekusar, whenever you say that name to anybody, if you're new to Magic, go to a card shop and say, hey, what kind of deck is Nekusar? I guarantee you 9 out of 10 people are going to say, oh, it's a wheel deck.
After they get done groaning.
Yeah. After they get done, like, what? Who told you to say that? Like, who hurt
what
you?
dirtbag?
Yeah, who hurt you?
Another thing you might do too is if you go to that gatherer site and you're looking for specific cards, maybe look by color and then you can look for older cards. A lot of times, if you're the type of player, like I would say, Duncan, you're probably most like this out of our group, who gets a ton of joy out of people seeing a card they've never seen before work.
Yeah.
You go and look for those older cards that no one's playing because you can find some gems in there. One, they're cheap a lot of times because no one's playing them.
Right.
And two, they're gonna get everyone's attention because no one's ever seen it before.
Well, I mean, so this is kind of going a little off track, but it is how it is fun to do that. It is fun to have cards that do a thing that help a deck. Other people have seen the deck. I didn't build Nekusar until fairly recently. It's been less than a couple months, I think.
Yeah.
Everybody else had built it and done it and moved on. And I kind of watched them and I just felt like, I think it could do better.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I'm saying I can do better. I'd say I think it could. And so that's when I started looking for some of these cards that were adjacent to what they were doing. And last night when I played it, a player that plays Nekusar a lot was like, wait, what's that? Wait, what is this? Oh, it doubles the wizard's triggers. It was Harmonic Prodigy.
Yeah.
I never even realized that he's a wizard. I've been playing him forever. Like, I never even thought about that.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, that's
double the
another thing too. Is a lot of times people will build decks. Like I do this, and it's like it's fine. The deck's good enough, so I don't put the new cards in it
Right.
because I don't have to. I don't have time to play. I certainly don't have time to sit around and friggin'
Upgrade decks.
goof around with the decks. So my deck's old, right? So like people will play these new dragons. And I'm like, oh, whoa, that'd be awesome in the Ur Dragon. So you're gonna run into that where people might have that Nekusar deck. They might have had it for friggin' 10 years.
Yep. And so if you do these tips we're talking about, you're going to find these gems that other people don't play. You're going to play your decks a little different than other people. That's why I wanted to do this, not EDH rec, because that's the easy way. You're going to play it the way everybody else does. Sure, you can go to the bottom of the synergy list and work your way up and maybe find some stuff. But I'm saying find stuff that maybe one person in that site plays or something. I'm not saying necessarily I have anything that rare in there, but I'm just saying you're gonna find some stuff nobody else plays, and you're gonna find stuff that makes you unique and different.
I will say the funniest thing that's happened to me when building some decks is I find a card and I'm like, I don't understand why this is like nowhere on a list. I'm like, am I reading this wrong? Like, is this not work the way I think it does? And I look up the rules and I'm like, no, it works. Like, I don't understand why no one's
how
playing
good
it.
does it feel
right.
when somebody's like,
it's so good. And the best part is, like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing card. I'm like, it costs 1 cent.
Yeah.
Like, it's a dirt card that no one cares about.
The thing I struggle with though is I love collecting, but I've said this before is I like to see the cards I collect.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll find those cards it's like 5 cents and have another card that's like $20 that does the same thing as a 5-cent card. Well, I have the $20 card.
Yeah.
I want to put it in the deck. So I'll put it in the deck instead of the 5-cent card. And I'm like, oh, this is stupid.
all you gotta do is
but
cut a
it's-
land, and then you can play them both.
Yeah.
yeah, right. Which you guys would do because I play a lot more lands than you guys. Yeah.
But
so that
anyway,
I can take 2 minutes to play it.
That's the tips on how to yeah. That's the tips on how to find those cards, that have synergy but maybe aren't on a lot of people's radar or aren't in the common. But that's just some tips for us from us to you. Sloan, you got any tips for the beginners?
Yeah, so kind of talking about this deck building concept and how to look out for things. One of the things that may have mentioned, but we've actually never really explained, is the term mana curve, right? So when we say the word and the phrase mana curve, essentially what that is going to mean is, I'm going to pull up my definition here for the guys. This is...
Yeah, it's for us. We don't know what mana curve is.
It represents how your deck looks based on the overall mana value of the spells in your deck, ranging from the low-cost spells up to the high-cost spells. So to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I pulled up my Archidect here with some of the decks that I've built. So Arkelos, because I mentioned him and I talked about him, his mana curve is actually only 2.73. It's very low to the ground. I have between 2 and 3 cost cards, I have just shy of 40 cards that are only 2 to 3 costs.
Does it show the curve?
Yeah, it shows
I
the
see
curve.
it?
So with the curve, it breaks it down not only by the mana cost, it breaks it down by the colors. So it tells you how many of each color you have. It tells you how many lands you have in a deck compared to creatures, compared to everything, artifacts, creatures, enchantments, instants. It breaks everything down for your Architect does.
Right.
But the mana curve essentially allows you to kind of dictate how much mana do I need, generally speaking, to have this deck run pretty adequately. And it's going to tell you, here's where your peak is. Most of your cards are landing between 2 and 3 mana, or most of your cards are landing between 4 and 5 mana. So you might be someone, like, for example, Jeff's Dragon deck. Mm-hmm. The mana curve on that, I'm assuming, is much higher than my 2.73.
So there's 2 parts. Yeah, the average mana cost is higher, but that's not mana curve. And to take a second to talk about that mana curve. So like there's some things that you learn about a deck based on that curve, not the average mana value, but the curve itself. So when I look at your curve, it's a mountain. So what that tells me is that there's a part of the game where you're going to be very, very effective. There are parts of the game where you're not going to be very effective unless you have massive card draw. Okay? Because what happens is yours is a mountain more than a curve. It goes way up, then it comes way down. So I've talked about that a little bit when we talk about your Ninja Commander, right?
Yeah.
So you have a higher mana average. I don't know what the curve is, but I know that you have a decent amount of cards that are at the high mana value towards the end of the curve. Meaning when you get to turn 9, 10, 11, if you do, you can draw a card and be effective on one card. When your mana curve is 2 and 3, turn 10, you're going to have to be playing multiple spells at the same time. If you happen to run into...
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, but if you happen to run into someone who's limiting how many cards you can play per turn, you're going to be very affected by that. So your curve also tells you how you're going to function throughout the amount of turns of the game. And you really do want, for most cases, to have a curve where it slightly goes up and it slightly comes down. Now, where that curve happens, does it happen at 2 and 3? Does the curve happen at 5 and 6? That will tell you also how effective you'll be throughout the game. So there's a lot to know about that curve if you want to get real sweaty and real nerdy and like dial into it.
So here's the thing. While what you said makes sense, I have found no real world truth to it. If you're peaked like his,
Yeah, like so for example,
you played just as well as what you did because his peak is 2 or 3. Yes, the only instance where I agreed 100% with what you said. I agree with a lot of what you said. But the only instance 100% is where you said, well, if somebody plays something that limits the number of spells you can cast. Yes.
Or lack of card draw.
But essentially, what's going to happen in that situation, and with Sloan's deck versus your curve, where it's very curved, then you're going to be able to play one card, he's going to play one card. Yours is going to be much bigger impact.
Yeah.
Because yours is going to be that higher mana cost.
Right.
But what it doesn't take into account is what else you're doing with your mana.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
He may want a low curve because he is also activating abilities. With ninjutsu, you don't care as much about the curve because you're ninjutsuing in stuff. You're cheating the curve.
Don't mix up mana value, like the mana value average, with curve.
Right, but I'm saying...
No, that's what a mana curve is.
Well,
that's literally the definition of mana curve.
It's not.
So you're both right. It is, but what he's saying is it should be more of a curve. And it is average mana value is the number they give you
Correct.
for the mana curve. But the mana curve is also the curve on the graph.
100%.
So you are both saying the correct things, but you're saying two different things.
Yes. There's more than just the mana average.
Right.
But you don't have to get in there. What Duncan's saying
I'm
is true too. You can ignore it completely. You'll probably be fine.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying though is like in Sloan's ninjutsu deck,
yeah,
the mana curve, the bell curve is going to show differently than how the deck plays because it's not taking into account ninjutsu.
Which is extremely fascinating. Can you bring up your ninjutsu deck?
Yeah, it says the mana curve is 3.36.
Yeah, but
comparative.
But the actual curve is...
It's a mountain at the
1.
top.
The actual curve's at 1.
It's all at 1.
Right.
Wow. So I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, because the reason why...
But I wonder what an average...
Because the mana curve for the deck is everything that I need to win is 1 drop unblockables and then ninjutsu in.
That's true. It's
What's
a ton
her
of
name?
1 drops. Yuriko?
Yuriko. Yuriko. So the reason why I wanted to talk about mana curve is because when you're looking at your deck, if you're noticing, for example, man, it takes a long time for my deck to get somewhere, there's usually a reason why. And a lot of times you can see that in the mana curve, right? You can see, well, most of my stuff is costing 5 and 6 and I don't have any ramp. Well, if you want to keep that bigger stuff in there,
right,
you need to get some ramp. Or why does it feel like I never have a hand? Well, all your stuff is 1 and 2, but you don't have any card draw. So if you want to keep that 1 and 2 dropping, stuff, you need to add some card draw in somewhere. So you got to get rid of. So the mana curve is there. It's very helpful for a lot of different things. And again, it's just another stat to kind of look up. But when we say the term mana curve, that's what we are referring to, and that's what that represents is the actual average of the deck based off of the mana values, and then the actual bell graph of the mana curve, which again, Archidect does for you automatically at the very bottom, and it breaks everything down for you, which is one of the reasons why I love Archidect. It helps show you.
And for me, I would not like to play the way Jeff said, where you have the curve, because what that means is you have just as many of the high mana cost cards in your hand or in your deck as the low mana cost.
Right.
And I play exactly the opposite of that, which is technically it is more of a CEDH strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
You want all low mana stuff that you can just pump out quick because you want all your cards to be done at the beginning of the game. You don't want it to go to turn 13. But
Right.
so that's where that mentality comes from. And I'm not saying
It's
that,
just how much you want to play on tempo. Some people ignore tempo. Some people love tempo. It's just how much do you want to play on tempo, and you don't have to. I mean, curve is just it's just a thing to help.
it's
you.
a
It's not
tool
the
to help
end
you.
all.
right. The thing I would say is mana curve, the number is something all players, if you want to have your decks be better, should so it's a little different from
Yeah, so
his.
this is like one of the most liked Eureka decks on Moxfield. So the curve doesn't always have to have a high bottom, but you see there's definitely more of a curve.
Yep.
But this is a tempo. This is literally Eureka tempo.
Right.
But
And that's
also,
why
there's
you-
no,
that's why the
there's
curve's
no
important
high
there.
stuff in there, so they're probably not doing top deck manipulation. It's probably just a ninja deck.
It could be. Yeah.
Oh, it for sure is. There's almost zero of any high cost stuff in there.
Right. They don't
Because it's a tempo
Sloan
deck.
plays cards in that deck that he will never cast.
Yeah, I have a card in that deck. I think I have 2 of them that are 11 mana. I probably will never cast those cards. The reason why is they're just there to do 11 damage to literally everybody
Right. Except you.
except me. Yeah. So
But so what I'm saying is the number is something that if you want your decks to be better, the mana curve number, something to pay attention to. The mana curve, the bell curve is something that, like Jeff said, if you want to play, I do think it is a good thing to play with and try out.
yeah.
And figure out which way you do like your decks.
Yeah.
I like my decks more heavy towards the low mana cost, light on the high mana cost. But in the end, your mana curve number, if you want to play better decks, faster decks, the lower the number, the more competitive. I will usually
Yeah,
say.
usually see.
I mean, my Nadu deck. I mean, not always. I'm sure Reese is very low mana curve number.
Actually, we could look up Reese, but I would bet it's a pretty good curve.
But like a Nadu is a one. My Nadu is a 1.48.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that is super low mana curve.
What this tells us is this is a great topic for us to maybe go into and look at some of the most popular decks across the format and really sort of dig into that curve thing, because I think that could be a fun thing to look
Yeah,
at.
we might do that for a future episode. That might be a good one. Maybe have Andrew come back.
we can have him do a quiz for us. He can name commanders, and we can try to guess what their average mana curve
Yeah,
is.
right.
Yeah, because it is funny though, because it sounds like my ninja deck would be like a higher cost CMC because it's a 3.3, but in reality, there's 20 cards that are 1. Like, you know, and there's even a couple 0 costs in there. So mana curve is kind of funny. Again, ultimately, it's just a tool to help you, and I just wanted to bring it up to let you know that there are websites that show it to you, and they help break it down for you and let you know, hey, here's what your mana curve kind of looks like. Here's where your mana is being spent. Here's where the colors are being spent. Like my ninja deck is I think it's almost 50-50 for black and blue.
Right.
It's pretty close to even. I have one deck, my legendary deck with Aragorn, where it's like all green, blue, and red and like a little white, because most of my legendaries are green and blue.
Right. So Jeff found the one for Reese.
It's a slope.
It's a slope. It definitely
It-
starts off steep at the top.
Yeah, because
beginning.
that's the elf
But what
part,
is the number?
2.31.
2.31. So it's
But
still
it
pretty
has
low.
it has 7, or it has 5 7 drops and 3 8 drops.
Right.
So it does.
And that's what rips it. And that's the same thing with my ninja deck. That's what rips my mana value up, is that I have those 11 drops, 10 drops, 9 drops
Right.
in there.
Now, here's the thing. CEDH players want to be well below 3. They
Right.
want to be like mid to low 2 or below. Well, who's that?
Atraxa. That's my
Atraxa.
favorite deck.
And
It's the
that's-
one I've spent the most time on, and it's like literally a perfect curve.
It's not a perfect curve.
It's a pretty good curve.
The end of it is very not curved. It is 3/4 of a curve with a big plateau.
With a suicide mountain at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's not, because there's only one permanent worth 8 and only one worth 7. But from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, look at that step all the way up.
Oh, you
That's
just moved
very
it.
good.
You moved it, but
so
I saw
on
it the first time.
on tempo, that's going to be very good. But that's a deck I mess with a lot. So you can
Right.
tell, like, I've spent a lot of time playing Atraxa and messing around with her.
Right.
So
I mean, it really depends what kind of deck you're trying to build, what kind of games you're trying to play.
Yeah.
So, but mana curve, if your deck is really just not, it's taking too long, it's really not getting there. By the time everybody else is doing something, yours isn't. Mana curve is definitely something to look at.
Yeah.
Or you're getting stuck like turn 3, 4. You're like, I don't ever have anything to do on turn 3 or 4. Well, you might look at your deck and like you don't have a lot of 3 drops or 4 drops. That
Right.
might be why.
Well, and I would say an average EDH deck should have the majority of its cards should be between 3 and 4. Probably
Yeah,
the stuff
for
you're playing.
casual play, yeah,
That's where
most
you're
of
going to
your-
see. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
most
where
of
you
your-
should see most curves.
most of your
so,
curve. So.
but so that's something to look at to help you get
Yeah.
your deck a little more in tune with what
Yeah, it's
other
a great,
people are playing, if they're playing, or if
great
yours is
tool.
way too fast. Add some slower stuff. Add some big stompy stuff. Add some big
have
mana.
some fun,
Yeah.
man. Yeah.
But that's all the time we have for this episode. We want to thank you guys for joining us. We want to thank Jack May at Info Pilgrims, as always, for being a great guy, helping us out, editing, producing. We're going to ask you to check us out at cast@commanderspod.com. You can email us if you have any questions, comments, concerns. If you want to, complain about Jeff's triggers and his first world problems, and
Yep. I'll
You
be
know,
there for that.
you head to our Patreon, patreon.com/commanderspod. We'd appreciate it. Anybody that wants to support us, we'd appreciate that support. Check out our YouTube videos. We got some box openings on there. At the end of the month, Duskmorn comes out, and we'll have another box we'll do then.
Yep.
Don't forget to check out our website, commanderspod.com. And most of all, if you really want to support this show, just remember, kill Andrew first.
If you can.
Gather around the table, friends, it's time to shuffle up. With Duncan, Jeff, and Sloan, let's fill our cups. Commander decks in hand, the battle's about to start. A podcast for the legends, where magic meets the heart. Commander's Pod, where the stories unfold. With heroes and villains, new and